The lost tech they buried to control us. The night the sky burned. The sky went red before the bells could finish their second note. Vault doors slammed, bronze pins hammered home, and the humming core at the city's center fell silent mid-tone. People dropped to their knees, whispering prayers no one remembered learning. In the crush, a scribe pressed a clay tablet under his robe. One scratched line, balance keeper failed. If you want to understand why they killed what kept them alive, we have to rewind, across water, light, wind, pressure, and cold, and follow the erasures. Verified finds only. Contested claims tagged. The pattern that broke them is accelerating now. Start at the river. Share this if you feel it. What they buried to control us is exactly what could keep us alive. The pattern they didn't want you to see. Here's the frame: accidental collapse. Tools meant to multiply abundance scale up. Couplings tighten. A nudge becomes a shove. Overshoot hits, backlash ripples, then someone purges the knowledge and calls the silence safety. It isn't malice by default. It's success turning brittle. Scope first, not gadgets in isolation, but systems that shaped energy, climate, information, and the biosphere. Think hydraulic timing that turned floods into clocks. Think concentrated sunlight hot enough for advanced alloys. Think wind routing that made pressure gradients pay wages. Think subsurface cooling that let seeds sleep decades. Think pneumatics holding cities above their tides. Think cognitive acceleration that taught thousands at once. Think reflective ice devices nudging seasonal feedbacks. Different geographies, similar temptations. Make more faster with less slack. Our method has guardrails. We triangulate archaeology texts and proxies. Artifacts and strata, cut stones aligned with flow thresholds, vitrified surfaces you can't get from campfires, precision tool marks in places nobody fishes for sport. Texts, inscriptions and chronicles that talk logistics, thresholds, prohibitions, sudden reforms. Proxies, ice cores with soot and sulfate stacked like ledger lines, isotopic ratios that flag temperature shifts and moisture changes. Verified evidence only. When interpretations diverge, we say so. Speculation stays bounded and minimal. There were secrecy systems that didn't look like secrecy. Temple bureaucracies that kept thresholds as ritual, not numbers. Imperial archivists who filed away schematics under prayers. Conquering states that burned archives to erase rivals, then blamed the victims for hubris. Modern gatekeepers too, ministries that embargo digs, labs that erase outliers because they threaten funding narratives. Patterns persist because incentives persist. Open loops will close later. A sealed desert vault with cold burnished walls and a curse mark nobody translates cleanly. A drowned library's logbooks that surface as warped planks and metal tags. Mountain mirror fragments with soot trapped in their microcracks dated to the same week across valleys. None of these tell a whole story alone. Together, they sketch a system. Stakes map plain and human. Abundance breeds brittleness when it's scheduled too tightly. Farmers plant on time because the river engine says it's time. When the signal drifts, there's no buffer. A valley learns to smelt at mountain temperatures. One wind gust lights a ridgeline. A port relies on wind corridors. A flattened gradient stalls monsoons where wheat needs to breathe. Cooling vaults preserve vaccines, grain, and memory. A moisture feedback turns quiet rooms into Petri dishes. Pressure domes defy tides. A leak sinks with spring surge and the whole city inhales at once. Memory grids open learning. Rumor kinetics turn deliberation into panic. Ice mirrors seem to promise a gentler season. Lagged responses whip the climate 2 years later. Why hide any of it? Because once you name the coupling, you own the risk. Priests who hold the flood dates become kings. Kings who hold the schematics make enemies. The public learns the system works until it doesn't, then blames the visible hands. After a crash, the fastest political move is to outlaw memory and call it piety. Don't touch the levers. Don't say the numbers. Taboos spread because they feel like safety. Before we dive, mark our rule set. We won't call an aligned terrace a heliostat unless we've got geometry, burn signatures, and tool residues to match. We won't call an air chamber a pressure dome without valve housings and trapped gas signatures consistent with controlled buoyancy. We won't call a rumor machine a teaching grid unless the tokens, scripts, and where patterns point to synchronized instruction. When we speculate, we say possible, not proven. When scholars disagree, we name the disagreement and keep moving. Now the pattern you aren't supposed to see hides in timing. First, the boost. A society finds a way to predict or control a variable: flood height, heat focus, wind direction, temperature, pressure, or attention. Then overshoot. Success justifies scale. The system grows faster than buffers and governance. Next, backlash, a drift, a wind shift, a leak, an unintended microbe, a rumor, a delayed climate response. Something that didn't matter at small scale becomes decisive. Purge follows. The people in charge kill the tool or the know-how to stop rivals or to stop the fear. A taboo spreads to lock the door. Myth cleans up the mess. Across these episodes, you'll hear the same words in different mouths. Keepers, balances, windows, weights, stillness, breath. You'll see parallel moves, split designs across monasteries, rewrite alphabets to break circuits, seed maps with lies, code bans as theology, brick cool rooms and curse them, exile engineers, erase the numeracy behind rituals. The forms shift. The function keeps rhyming. This isn't a pitch that ancients had lasers and UFOs. It's a case that they built composite systems whose edge cases we still struggle to govern. You can test parts of this today. Hydraulics, we still use rating curves and sills. Solar concentration, heliostat fields melt salt by the acre. Wind routing, cities have learned hard lessons about urban canyons and heat islands. Subsurface cooling, passive radiative cooling is back in journals. Pneumatics. Caissons and air bells built bridges and tunnels with bends and blowouts when mismanaged. Mass pedagogy, social platforms are rumor machines with metrics. Climate mirrors, geoengineering proposals live in policy drafts and preprints. Why revisit their taboos now? Because we're rebuilding fragile abundance with less slack and tighter coupling than any time in history. Supply chains span oceans with just-in-time margins thinner than a stylus tip. Power grids synchronize across continents. Information systems couple minds in minutes. Climate feedbacks are no longer background music. The same loop, boost, overshoot, backlash, purge, taboo can play globally fast. So we'll walk the eras with care. We'll show you the stones, the soot, the scripts, the cores. We'll mark the contested bits. We'll flag the leaps. We'll keep the focus on people, not props. Farmers watching gauges, smiths at altitude squinting into heat, navigators reading port stones as if they were lines of verse. Stewards of cold who listened for condensation, engineers who trusted air and drowned, teachers who made memory a grid and watched it spark. Councils who turned dials in ice caves and learned what lag really means. The first erasure lived by the flood. It died in a year they called black. To understand why a river could be a machine and how a calendar could be a lever, stand where the water rose just enough to feed everyone until someone forced the window one season too far. The river engine of the two crowns. Stand where the river slows and breathes. The banks wear grooves like a ruler. Stone thresholds sit at precise heights chiseled with marks that match flood stages. This wasn't just water, it was a schedule made of silt. Stakes first because people felt them in their stomachs. When the river arrived within a narrow window, fields soaked just enough, seeds woke in sequence, labor crews moved like clockwork, and granaries filled the way a chest rises and falls. Missed the window and the same water rotted roots, toppled storage, and turned surplus into grief. Food meant legitimacy. Legitimacy meant quiet streets. Timing kept both. Action looked like a network, not a single machine. Along the floodplain, nilometers rose from stone-lined shafts, calibrated reeds reading inches like sentences. Their marks weren't decorative. Each notch mapped to a decision. Open the east gate, hold the western sluice, divert to the settling basin, release to the high fields. Channel stones formed narrow throats that trained flow and amplified small changes. Upstream, water-lifting chains clanked, counterweights and ceramic buckets tipping with a rhythm you could hear at dusk, charging terraces to pre-wet soil before the main rise. Downstream, spillways sat at cut heights that nudged the crest to arrive when crews were ready and the sun still had weeks of kindness left. Evidence doesn't care about romance. You can walk the abandoned channels and see cut alignments that match hydraulic models. Sediment layers settle in abrupt steps, not gradients, human fingerprints on river behavior. Nilometer records where they survive show seasonal readings with thresholds flagged, followed by distributions of rations and work orders in administrative texts. Surveyors today overlay LiDAR on old floodplains and find revetments and training walls converging to angles that only make sense if somebody was tuning the rise. Meanwhile in town, granaries weren't barns. They were instruments tied to water. Doors stayed sealed until the nilometers crossed agreed heights. When the needle read really hit the 6th mark, stewards set quotas for thrashing crews and millers. At 7th, they opened reserve channels to fill emergency cisterns. Numbers mapped to food security. Ritual wrapped each move, so the public saw priests pour libations when behind the charm a hinge pin was pulled. Success bred ambition. A century of perfect floods, anomalously stable rises within the sweet window swelled populations and erased institutional memory of lean years. Children grew up believing the river loved them. Officials grew up believing their hands on stone made it so. The temptation arrived softly. If you could pull a gate a day early to match an emerging labor calendar, why not? If you could extend that window by an inch on the gauge, by another week of soil work, why not? They learned to force flood windows, small anticipatory releases upstream, a little more pre-wet, a little less spill to waste to align nature to schedule. Complications stacked. Farmers planted to the schedule more than to the sky. Buffers shrank because why store extra when the river had been reliable? New fields crept into zones that only stayed stable when the timing was exact. Meanwhile, the river, being a river, drifted. A dustier decade upstream shifted watershed lag. Minor channel migration turned a narrow throat into a slightly wider one. The rules that had worked at one geometry no longer fit perfectly. The system had less slack to absorb it. Then the Black Inundation year. The records talk of omens and portents because that's how panic writes, but the sediments are blunt. A surge arrived later than expected, riding on a storm pulse that hadn't been accounted for. Emergency releases meant to pre-drop the crest met a wind setup that pushed water back. The crest stacked. Downstream, the training walls amplified instead of diffused. Water ran high and stayed high. Granary platforms that had always been above the edge took on water. Grain swelled, split, fermented. Whole stores turned to foul heat. Rats and rot followed. Fields planted on the force schedule met a prolonged soak, roots drowned. Action in the crisis was human and hurried. Crews hammered at gates while priests blew conch shells and shouted prayers that sounded like orders. Runners moved between nilometers carrying readings scrawled on wax, numbers climbing with no room left on the tablet. The designers, the ones who had argued for not forcing windows, stood near the control stones and watched the river ignore their design. A scribe wrote a blunt line, "Thresholds overrun, hold the east gate." Someone else scratched over it in charcoal, "Too late." Stakes turned into faces. Bakers measured mold with their noses and wept. Boatmen who knew eddies by name misjudged new currents and capsized. In the outer wards, where pre-wedding had been pushed to chase expansion, the mud never released. People there watched the central wards dry first and accused the priests of betrayal. Impact hit politics before the water receded. The same officials who had celebrated perfect floods faced a city that saw their hands on the levers. The cure was an old one: purge the knowledge, purge the people who held it, recode the failure as sacrilege and the ban as piety. Designers were accused of hubris, some executed, others exiled to far fields to learn humility from the soil. Schematics, wax boards with channel dimensions, stone tally sticks with threshold sequences, even cords knotted with schedule codes, were sealed in temple vaults under prayers. Inscriptions that had once stated flood numbers were recarved to say offerings and virtues. The rituals remained, the numeracy vanished. You can still feel the masking. Later texts forbid counting the river beyond the 8th mark, a rule framed as spiritual humility. The 8th mark in surviving nilometers is scratched out. Processions began to circle the city when the reed reached an unspecified height. The language shifts. Window becomes blessing. Threshold becomes taboo. In households, elders told children not to say certain numbers near the water. Ignorance became safety, and people believed it because memory of the rot was still in their noses. The machine ecology unwound unevenly. Some outposts kept their local alignments going quietly, passing down rules as proverbs. Never open before the wind changes, Silt speaks, listen with a stick. Others cemented the ban so thoroughly that when later rulers tried to rebuild, they found only ritual, no math. In the gap, hunger bred movements. A rebel sect preached that the river had been angered by men carving scales into its skin. They pulled stones from channel throats at night. With each removal, control truly did lessen, vindicating their belief and deepening the taboo. What nobody recorded in plain words, but the layers implicate, is that the system had once had a governor, a simple set of cross-watch signals that prevented forced windows when upstream lag didn't match. That small break seems to have been neglected during the perfect century, its maintainers sidelined because their job was to say no. When they were gone, the incentive to keep pushing yes had no counterweight. The river didn't punish, the coupling did. In the aftermath, temple schools taught hymns to water spirits and banned arithmetic beyond market sums. The next generation grew up expert in procession routes and poor at reading gauges. The city survived, the river still rose, but its abundance narrowed to what ritual could safely carry. Trust, once placed in thresholds and teams, shifted to masks and chants. That was the point, by design. While river priests sanctified ignorance and bricked away their schematics, another council in thin air started catching sunlight with stone and silver. Where water had been tuned by inches, light would be tuned by angles. The stakes would travel faster than floodwater. The burn would be sudden and the sky would carry the scar. The machine that taught too much. Start in a plaza that shouldn't echo, yet it does, not from walls but from memory. Stones set in a grid, each slab carved with grooves and small reliefs, hands, birds, knots, simple shapes repeat across squares like a quiet pattern. Children once sat here and learned faster than their elders thought possible. The stakes were minds and pace. A memory web that accelerated literacy and craft training didn't just teach letters, it shortened apprenticeships, pried open gatekeepers, monopolies, and let ideas outrun deliberation. When learning scales, the human part of the system becomes the risky variable. Rumor rides the same rails as wisdom. Speed confuses trust. Action looked like theaters without roofs. Mnemonic grids covered plazas, each tile linked to a sound, a sign, a step. Instructors walked paths, right, forward, left, pause, so bodies encoded syntax while voices layered rhythm. Along the edges, mnemonic theaters rose, semicircles of step seating facing friezes of icons arranged in sequences. Students faced out and in, teaching back what they'd been fed, cross-checking each other's recall in real time. Distributed circuits formed when multiple plazas synchronized their cycles by drum and horn. A story taught here, harvest math, rope-making knots, civic law, rippled across neighborhoods in an afternoon. Evidence turns up under dust and undercuts. Identical pedagogy tokens, palm-sized tiles carved with paired cues like a bird and a tally, appear at sites separated by days of walk, carved from different stone but to the same ratio and depth. Styluses in midden heaps show wear at angles that match quick, repeated marking, not slow scribing, tips polished on one facet from speed drills. Inscriptions layer reforms, scripts shifting abruptly, letter forms simplified along axes that match teaching paths. The spacing and stroke order change in a single generation, too fast for drift, perfect for instruction by grid. The first cohorts felt like flying. A baker's daughter learned weights and contracts before she'd braided 10 loaves. A mason's son learned arch ratios in chants, 3 beats span, 1 beat rise, hold, test. Midwives learned dosing tables in songs mapped to steps along the plaza's edge, so the path itself carried safety when panic blurred thought. Gatekeepers, scribes with monopoly on law, priests with monopoly on ritual calendars, guild elders with monopoly on craft lore, lost control of who knew what and when. Complication arrived as noise, speed-packed cues dense. The grids worked by aligning rhythm, image, and voice. When a teacher mistimed a step or a plaza ran one beat off from a neighboring square, layers misaligned. Students began to snap to false couplings, bird with tacks, not with guilt, small errors that cascaded as students taught students. Rumors found the same paths. A murmur about spoiled grain echoed across 3 plazas before noon, the mnemonic shape of the story reinforcing it every time a hand landed on the wrong tile. The memory web made empathy efficient and panic synchronized. News of a sickness in one ward, faster breaths, cold sweats, taught itself by gesture, hand to chest, step back, pause, 2 beats. People in distant wards began breathing faster because they'd learned the pattern. Merchants started runs on salt because a counting chant included a line about brine in a fever remedy that wasn't meant for that audience. Teachers tried to correct in the afternoon what the morning had overwritten. Evidence of overload shows in layers of wear. On some plazas, deeper grooves appear at corners where instructors turned often. In crisis years, those corners polish faster, consistent with frenetic cycles. Pedagogy tokens from those strata show icons recarved, not simplified, birds abstracted as if someone tried to reduce misreads by shaving detail. Stylus tips from later layers blunt, suggesting slower, heavier writing, drag reintroduced to thinking. Crisis got a name people spat, 7 days of fear. It began with a theft rumor, grain missing from the city storehouse, taught on a grid as a cautionary tale, then taken as report when a teacher's tone carried urgency. It met a fever in the river ward, the kind that makes skin cool and hands shake. The memory web shot both across the city. Within hours, plazas ran hot with synchronized flinches. Crowds formed in markets and temples not because of orders, but because paths led there in the stories. A council decree posted at noon, calm language, ration schedule, couldn't land, the grids were still pulsing fear. People smashed what had taught them. On day 3, youths pried up tiles at the plaza center and used them to break reliefs. In a theater, a father lifted a child to strike an icon of a hand with a rod because that hand had just led the crowd into a crush. Teachers tried to hold space with silence, shut the drums, hold the steps, but silence in a system built on rhythm reads like a beat waiting to drop. The rumor machine filled the gap. Councils blamed heresy because heresy makes fear legible. Edicts outlawed synchronized teaching outside temples. Drums used for instruction were seized, some burned, some rehung as ritual instruments with new names. Scripts were rewritten for drag letters complicated on purpose. Stroke orders changed to break muscle memory. Some forms were mirrored left-right so old chant walks misfired. In one law code, the alphabet's simplest characters got tails and hooks that slowed stylus speed by a third, measured from wear distribution. Literacy fell not because people forgot, but because the path hurt now. Impact cut long and deep. Crafts retreated to guild secrecy. Apprenticeships stretched again into years. The plaza grids were paved over or left to crack. In acts, oral instructors emerged, carrying compact bodies of knowledge wrapped in lineage and oath, moving between households like rare spice. Public learning narrowed to festivals and recitations that taught safe content, genealogies, moral stories, hymns that counted days without numbers. The rumor channels survived in bones. Crowds still felt together, but they learned to distrust the feeling. Fragments persisted in useful disguises. A potter's guild kept a pocket grid on the inside wall of the kiln room, tiles to touch before firing, hand, water, fire, lid, pause. A midwife traced an old teaching path on rush mats as she taught a new girl how to count breaths between contractions, 2 steps, 2 taps, wait. A law clerk filed complaints by a sequence of icons pinned under the desk, bird for trade, not for debt, hand for assault, so clients who couldn't write could still point. These weren't revolts, they were survival, memory encoded in corners. Evidence of the rewrite shows in tomb texts. One generation praises speed of mind, the next praises patience of hand. Stylus where patterns shift from angled polish to blunt plateau. The same line, knowledge without weight is wind, appears in 3 cities within a decade, carved over earlier dedications to open eyes. That's not evolution, that's policy. Why did it fall so hard? Because the machine that taught too much didn't just transmit content, it synchronized attention. When you couple minds tightly and remove friction, you make empathy and panic run on the same rails. Without norms and buffers, the fastest signal wins, and in crowds, fear signals carry. After the smash, councils declared victory over chaos. Priests reclaimed calendars, guilds reclaimed apprentices. The city slowed. Ideas that might have leaped in a morning now took months. Some argued that stability returned. Others noticed how long it took to correct a mistake. A woman who'd learned to read on a grid taught her granddaughter in whispers at night, fingers tapping a blanket stitches. The granddaughter grew deft with knots and weak with law. Meanwhile, far north, inside ice that remembers longer than stone, a different teacher watched the sky like a calendar and promised a lever to move seasons. Councils there didn't fear speed. They feared delay and twisted it anyway. The mirror in the glaciers. Walk north until the air gets thin and clean enough to sting, where silence has a texture and light bounces brighter than seems fair. In a crevasse mouth, plates of mica lie stacked like fish scales, edges silvered. Above them, a shaft opens to the pale sky. Someone once taught ice to think in seasons. The stakes weren't local. A predictive climate interface tempts control on a map wider than a kingdom. Get the feedbacks right and you shave drought, tame flood, soften winter teeth. Misread the lag and your hand on one dial moves a world 2 years later, far away, harder than you imagined. Action took shape in glint and dust. Albedo mirrors, thin bright plates laid on summer snowfields, push sunlight back to space, holding the melt line higher into late season. Near the glacier's edge, aerosol chambers sat under snow domes, stone rooms with mineral trays and candle-like burners for controlled sulfur and ash, their vents leading to wind-protected chimneys. Councils turned seasonal dials carved in rock, rings etched with notch codes for summer gain, autumn bleed, winter rest, encoding lag built from observation. 2 notches now, 1 notch next thaw. Evidence lives in layers that don't lie. Ice cores pulled nearby show soot and sulfate spikes in precise stairsteps, not volcanic chaos, aligned with thin mica fragments entrained at stratified depths. The soot's isotopic fingerprint fits low-temperature combustion of mineral oils and resin, not eruptive plume. Animal remains down valley shift oddly, die-offs at latitudes mismatched to local weather, consistent with pushed seasonal bands. On boulders, you can read inscriptions weathered shallow, triangles for sky, circles for sun, ticks counting turns, paired with lines that translate to hold and release. Someone kept books in ice. The people here weren't mystics first, they were bookkeepers with snow on their boots. They measured thaw with sticks on poles and wrote melt depth by lamplight. When the cave's drip slowed, a clerk marked it. When mountain shadows arrived earlier, they marked that too. They mapped how much mirror on which slope bought how many days of late sun. They learned to burn mineral trays in a trickle when autumn clouds already seeded themselves, to avoid dumping aerosols into clear skies where they'd linger wrong. Complications crept in from ambition and kindness. A string of southern drought years sent messengers with cracked lips and gifts, begging for milder summers and heavier rains. Councils up north turned the seasonal dials a little further toward cool and seed, plans written on slate with notches that assumed last year's lag would hold. Meanwhile, a small volcano in a western chain burped, not a monster, just enough to lift the baseline sulfate in the stratosphere. The data runner's shoes were slow. The dials moved before the new background arrived. Delays stack like bad debts. The first year after the tweak, southern clouds cooperated, harvests along one river rose. Scribes sent thanks and offerings, woven cloth with mountain patterns, songs sung to ice spirits repurposed from wind gods. In the north, glacier tongues advanced a little further than planned, which looked like success if your horizon was a single valley. The council logged it and adjusted 1 notch back in winter. Then the second year hit, the baseline was heavier with volcanic aerosol. The chambers under snow burned to the same schedule, unaware they were adding to a sky already more reflective. The mirrors went out as planned, but the sun bounced more than the model assumed. Summer cooled farther south than mapped, monsoon edges slipped, places outside the target went dry, others went wet and stayed wet too long. In ice caves, drip notes sounded different, thinner, higher, because less melt fed the stone bowls. Crisis didn't roar, it arrived as a quiet that shouldn't have been there. In the northern forests, birds timed to early insects arrived to empty air. Farther south, shoots stayed asleep until a sudden late sun shocked them, and then a cold snap killed what dared to wake. Councils received slabs of news separated by weeks, each contradicting the last. Flood here, frost there, blight on one coast, clear skies that never broke on another. They met by torchlight in the glacier's blue rooms, breath smoke mingling with lamp smoke, and argued about lag while their fingertips knew the ice was wrong under the oil. Evidence of the overcorrection is ugly and precise. In the layers that match this sequence, sulfate peaks stack closer than any known eruptive cluster. Mica flakes line up with them. Pollen profiles show a sharp drop in warmth-loving species 2 lines below frost-damaged grains, the signature of a 2-year lag biting where no one expected. Lake Varves widen and darken in bands matching late snowmelt. Inscriptions etched after the worst winters carve a command in simple language: do not touch the sky. The councils did what scared stewards always do when tools bite beyond their own horizon. They turned everything off fast, then outlawed the knowing. Mirrors were hauled into caves and split with deliberate fractures so they couldn't be relayed to a shine. Aerosol chambers were bricked and marked with sigils meaning plague, which wasn't wrong from a distance, airborne, delayed, everywhere. The seasonal dials were ground flat and the flake dust thrown to wind. Carved phrases that once said hold, release, were recut into prayers for patience. Impact at human scale is a widow standing in a field holding a dead stalk that looks healthy until you look close. It's a fisherman patching nets on a river that runs high and cold too late, fish out of step with his calendar. It's a caravan turning back at a closed pass because snow sits where it never did in memory. It's a town writing new walls on clear days because the wrong rains keep testing them in months nobody's grandparents planned for. Language calcified the taboo. Sky words turned sacred and empty of control. Priests took over solstice readings and banned counting the light. A charm against hubris hung in the entry of meeting houses, a polished stone turned face down. Children learned a line that made elders feel safe: leave the sky's wheel to sky. In law, penalties for casting dust without fire rose next to treason. Every mirror as tool became mirror as vanity prop. Polished metal was suspect unless it framed a face. Fragments survived in winter trades. Shepherds kept note of which face took snow longer and called it luck, not albedo. Roofers whitewashed tiles in late spring for heat, an honest half-truth. In a northern village, a woman placed thin shale on her garden on drought days and pulled it at dusk, favoring herbs that wanted cool feet. Her neighbors teased her until their tea tasted better. In a hidden alcove, a child of a clerk traced the ghost of a ground-flat dial and dragged a finger one notch just to feel the grit. The mirror in the glacier wasn't a god machine. It was a ledger with levers attached, managed by people who knew enough to believe they needed more time than the world gave them. What nobody knew at the time, what the layers tell and the inscriptions admit in their silences, is that the interface assumed its keepers would survive long enough to remember the lag. They didn't. The oath that followed kept the next hand away from the dial by burning the manual and calling the ash holy. Modern digs found the flakes and the soot and the lines on stone. Ministries flagged the papers and asked for restraint. Bidders made quiet calls. The taboo whispered louder. Then one excavation turned up something with alloys that matched a river city's valves and a mountain's cradles, with inscriptions that named a role, not a god, keeper of breath and flow. The ice had held only one chapter. The book was longer. The dig that should have stayed buried. Start with a trench at dawn, tarps flapping like tired lungs. A modern team works a grid in dust the color of old paper. They've got permits posted on a clipboard, GPS pins in flagged corners, and a camera that chirps every time a frame lands. No myths on site, just measurements. Then the trowel hits a ring that isn't stone. Stakes feel abstract in briefing slides and immediate when your fingers close on an alloy that shouldn't be there. The team isn't chasing legends, they're mapping a late-period workshop district that flood and wind collapsed, a safe, bureaucratic project with clear deliverables. But the stratigraphy keeps lying politely. A valve collar turns up in a layer that should hold grain grinders. A mirror fragment with microsoot sits under roof tile. A ceramic with brine crust hides in a niche near what looks like an air shaft. One trench touches all our earlier lines like wires meeting at a bus. Action unfolds over weeks. They expand the square, step down in 10-centimeter lifts, log every find. Out comes a disc of hammered metal with inscriptions half-worn, curves that echo the balance motifs we've seen on river and delta fragments. A ribbed housing with threaded interior matches the pitch of collars cataloged from the drowned city, not identical but kin. A polished shard, not glass, not simple stone, carries a crystalline matrix with a thin layer of condensed organics trapped in pits, the same patina that forms in cold, still air. In a corner, a tile shows a teaching icon, hand, and not reused as paving. It looks like refuse until they assemble the geometry around a cavity with conduits running like veins. They stop calling it the cavity when the probe map draws a shape, a central chamber with radial channels, each terminating near a component class they can name from other continents. One tunnel leads toward a culvert in a cut in bedrock that once held water. Another ends at a bracket designed to hold a plate at an angle no roof needs. A third opens into a shaft lined with soot and deposits that fit low-temperature combustion. A fourth runs to a plenum whose lips still ring if you tap them. On the chamber floor, a pedestal empty carries an inscription border, Keeper of Breath and Flow. The same naming shows up on fragments from the delta. Crosshatch tally marks repeat counts we saw on mountain grids. The team stares at notes that shouldn't agree, agreeing. Methods stay cautious. They sample residues with sterile swabs. They run portable XRF on alloys, copper, tin, trace nickel, and something else, manganese, in ratios that match known high-stress fittings from the pressure city. They take microcores from the soot line, stable isotope signatures consistent with resin and oil, not wild burn. They cut a wafer from the polished shard. The surface bears microabrasion patterns like heliostat maintenance. They document it all, write possible coupling hub in a draft note, and flag the phrase as speculative bounded. Then the anomalies start. A small wind first. When they uncap one radial duct at night to ventilate the trench, cold air spills the way it shouldn't in summer. The night sky sits clear, the duct faces north. They log a 2-degree drop in the chamber by morning. No miracle, just geometry working the way those whisper ducts once did. Encouraged, they place a mirror fragment on the ancient bracket at midday. No beam, no furnace, just a glint on the chamber wall. A field tech laughs. It's harmless. Then a weather station a kilometer away notes a wind shift out of cycle, a tiny blip. Correlation isn't causation, but the timing yanks the team's attention. 2 days later, a battery bank on their clean power trailer trips hard at noon. Surge current that doesn't match load curves blows a fuse they've never replaced on site. They find a ground issue dust in a connector, but the waveform they pulled from the logger looks like a resonance spike, a frequency the chamber could be helping, not making. They start monitoring the room like it's a patient. Temp, humidity, pressure, noise. At dawn, the plenum lip hums a note so low you hear it with molars. They find no fault in the sensor. Someone writes distant traffic on the whiteboard and wipes it when they realize there isn't a road within 40 kilometers. Evidence of a third anomaly arrives in a Petri dish. A routine swab from the chamber floor plates a colony that blooms overnight under cool incubation, filamentous fast. The lab tent flags contamination. They redo the pass in clean gear. It blooms again, slower. The sequence later says it's a known genus, no horror, but the growth rate at that temperature is off the chart. A veteran on the team stares at the dish and then at the whisper ducks and doesn't sleep well. Calls begin, friendly at first. A ministry liaison checking progress, reminding them of publication protocols. Then softer voices from numbers not in the contact sheet, offering help with security, suggesting that early data should flow through national channels before journals. A company rep leaves a voicemail about heritage preservation and responsible development. The team lead writes emails about transparency and sends them to a folder named Administrivia. The folder grows. Complication arcs from inside and out. In the camp, a senior archaeologist argues for full documentation before any more tests. A younger method lead wants to model the chamber with an external pump to see if the ducts respond like historical literature suggests, controlled minimal flow. An engineer on loan suggests rehanging the mirror fragment to original tolerances to get better signal. The biologist says no one ventilates until they know what's blooming. At the same time, the university's legal office calls about NDAs someone sent without consent. An ethics board email arrives stamped urgent after 2 routine reminders were ignored in the dust of discovery. Action tightens. The team agrees to pause physical interaction and to capture high-res scans. They erect a better fence. They post a night watch after a drone buzzes the site at dusk. They log every entry in white boots and gloves like a hospital. They file a preprint with redacted coordinates and a cautious thesis. Composite architectural node integrating hydraulic, optical, pneumatic, and thermal subassemblies, possible coordination role. They label speculation and double underline possible. That night the seizure arrives, black SUVs in dust. Local police with a warrant citing heritage protection and public safety. A national agency rep who smiles too much. The team lead asks to see the order. A paragraph references biohazard risk and infrastructure perturbation. The tents go up. Laptops, drives, field notebooks boxed. The whiteboard is photographed, erased by a hand the team doesn't know, then photographed again clean. In the dark outside the fence, 2 researchers step out to call partners. By morning, they're not at their cots. Security says they left with officials. Their phones die on a road past a ridge with no signal. The official story lands at noon. Site activity suspended due to miscalibration causing equipment damage. no mention of whispers or ducks or plates. A local paper runs a photo of a tarp in a trench and quotes a spokesperson about unfortunate safety lapses. The ministry returns a sanitized inventory. The mirror shard is misplaced. The alloy ring is under analysis off-site. The Petri dishes are destroyed as protocol. The team gathers in a rented room with bad air and counts losses with names pinned to empty chairs. Impact feels familiar if you've heard the river's vault doors slam or watched a council split a design into monasteries. The pattern repeats: seal, purge, taboo, but with modern fonts and polite emails. The site is recontextualized as a sensitive heritage zone. Access narrows to those with the right badges and the right scripts. In forums, curiosity spikes because vague statements feed hunger. Rumor fills gaps: aliens, cursed machines, government weather control. The team hates the noise because it hurts the truth they could still defend. Then a whistleblower cache drops into a private inbox the way a stone drops into still water. Encrypted files unpacked to images and scans the team thought were gone. The pedestal inscription, the radial channel map, the alloy spectre, the plenum lip with measurement marks, the dulled notch on a dial stone. A note rides the bundle. They think it's a weapon. It is. It's a governor. Don't let them freeze the story. The cache includes a sketch from a confiscated notebook, arrows linking duct, bracket, plenum, culvert. Next to it, a phrase in a field hand: balance, keeper, hub, not control, coordination. The hand has underlined keeper, not balance. You can hear the scribe from the red sky years whispering through clay: balance, keeper, failed. The weight in the word isn't power, it's restraint. What nobody outside the fence knows yet is the simplest fact. The device woke a little when air and angle met again. Not roaring to life, just a cough, a hint of what it was built to do: drag small drifts toward center. The team saw enough to fear clumsy hands. The state saw enough to fear rivals. The bidders saw enough to smell money. The pattern sees itself and moves to lock the door. We step back here not because the story is finished, but because it's repeating faster than anyone on site can think. The same loop the ancients traced in stone is drawing itself in press releases: Boost, Overshoot, Backlash, Purge, Taboo. Our difference is scale. Our coupling runs planetary now and our slack is thin. If we can decode the rulebook written in their failures, we don't have to bury this one too. The hidden rulebook. Step back from the trench, the vault doors, the burned terraces. Lay the episodes side by side and you start hearing the same drum under different songs. That's the rulebook nobody wrote down, the one their bands tried to erase. Stakes first. Without shared norms that fit tight, coupled systems, the loop accelerates. Boost, Overshoot, Backlash, Purge, Taboo. Every time the tool works, someone scales it to the edge of what governance can hold. Every time it bites, the fastest political move is to kill the know-how, salt the words, and call the silence wisdom. That reflex buys calm and breeds fragility. Action is decoding the recurring moves in plain speech. Boost. A society tames a variable: water height, solar angle, wind flow, thermal gradient, pressure phase, attention rhythm, albedo. Overshoot. Success scales faster than buffers. Maintainers who say no lose status. Backlash. Drift or lag turns yesterday's edge case into today's trigger. Purge. Leaders eliminate tools and stewards to stop real or rival risk. Taboo. Language rewrites memory so future hands won't rebuild the coupling. Myth. A story carries the ban longer than law. Evidence crosses centuries and climates. Cross-epic motifs recur: keeper, window, breath, stillness, waits, release. Ritualized unlearning shows up in vows, split designs across monasteries, burn manuals, grind dials flat, recarve numbers as virtues, outlaw synchronized steps. Linguistic erasures track the band's words for counting flood marks or citing sun angles turn into pieties or insults. Suppression nodes map to power, temple ledgers sealed, imperial archives cleansed, guild halls emptied, modern ministries stamping heritage risk. The shapes change, the pressure points don't. Complicates this today is speed and incentive. Modern systems reward fast convergence. Algorithms optimize attention into synchronized pulses that look a lot like those plaza grids minus the drums. Markets chase tight coupling, just-in-time everything, erasing slack because slack costs. Infrastructure interlocks across borders. A rumor outruns a correction by orders of magnitude. A software update can reroute power, finance, and traffic before breakfast. The loop runs on silicon now. Crisis is already built into our wiring. We've rebuilt fragile abundance with less slack and tighter coupling than any ancestor faced. Hydrology rides satellites and power markets. A drought on one river shocks food and electricity across continents. Solar and wind grids demand balancing heuristics that look suspiciously like those old dials, with lags measured in minutes instead of seasons. Platforms turn cognition into corridors. A misaligned queue pushes millions into the same lane. Climate feedbacks arrive stacked. Aerosols drop, heat jumps, rainfall bands shift. Players reach for levers without a manual we trust. So the rulebook we need isn't a prohibition list. It's a stewardship set built from their scars. Modularity first, build composite systems as compartments with friction between them. The river engine failed hardest when every granary tied to one timing signal. The plaza panicked worst when every mine stepped to the same beat. Design choke points that fail gracefully, breakers that isolate, not binary cutoffs that plunge whole cities into dark. Second, slow ramps. The mountain mirrors jumped gain without proving shutters and wind guards across seasonal cycles. The glacier dials turned a notch too far without current background. Any intervention that couples to a climate, a grid, or a crowd should have mandatory ramp schedules with monitoring gates, no doubling capacity until independent audits show stability at each step. That buys time for lag to show its teeth before the bite is lethal. Third, transparent audits. The keepers who vanished, river governors, alignment stewards, valve masters, were the ones paid to say no and show their math. Today that means independent observatories with power to publish live, river flows, grid harmonics, platform cascade metrics, aerosol loads, not ministry-approved retrospectives. If the data can be sealed, the reflex to seal it will win the minute a curve scares a minister. Fourth, kill switch commons. Not secret overrides locked in vaults, but community-owned breaks that stakeholders can trigger under clear thresholds. Frequency bands that island a grid, traffic throttles that desynchronize feeds, aerosol draws that force a cooling ramp to zero. The Taboo version of a kill switch is a ban dressed as theology. The civic version is an oath. We all hold the key, none of us holds it alone. Fifth, partial disclosure without riddles. Seeding maps with lies made coasts unsafe and ensured only insiders learned. But full blueprints in adversarial hands invite weaponization. The compromise is layered publication, operational principles open, exact gains, tolerances, and high-risk configurations behind stewardship licenses that rotate across jurisdictions, reviewed in public meetings, revoked for breach. Not priesthood, not anarchy. This isn't softer than a ban, it's harder. It asks for institutions whose status depends on restraint, not throughput. It demands that maintainers, people who say not yet, earn more cultural capital than accelerators. Our ancestors cut those people out right before the crash. We keep doing it with budgets and clout. Impact lands in how we talk and train. Change the language that turns buffers into waste and friction into failure. In schools, teach lag literacy alongside code and calculus, hands-on labs where delayed feedback punishes naive control. In agencies, promote the keeper class, tie career ladders to successful no's that prevented clean-looking disasters. In platforms, reward desynchronization, feed designs that diversify rhythms instead of collapsing them to one beat. Map suppression nodes before crisis. We know where seals happen, wherever data meets fear, wherever findings cross budgets, wherever a clean story needs a dirty footnote. Build alarms for those rooms. When a ministry locks a vault for safety, trigger oversight by default. When a lab erases outliers that break a narrative, force a replication grant rather than a reprimand. When a company offers security for a discovery it wants to patent, require a stewardship plan first. None of this resurrects burned mirrors or unbricks cold rooms. It does something quieter, it makes forgetting harder. The ancients buried machines to bury the temptation. We don't get that luxury at planetary scale. Our machines are already inside our weather, our markets, our minds. While we still have the breath to choose, write the rulebook in daylight. Make the oath public, count, slow, audit, isolate, share enough, and honor the hand that pulls back. One loop remains open, the artifact that went quiet under the red sky because the people who kept the breaks were gone. We go back to that chamber now not to worship it, but to read what job its keepers were hired to do. Back to the burning sky. Back in the chamber under the red sky, the inscription wasn't poetry. Keeper of breath and flow named a job, synchronized, dampen, refuse, drift. The hub didn't command, it listened. Ducts tasted pressure. Brackets read glare. Plenums heard tone. Culverts felt rise. It cross-checked and only then nudged. Reconstruct the chain. River timing fed a pulse. Gauge beats turned into open or hold signals. Mountain mirrors sent gain, but the hub compared angles to wind notes from pressure bells. If gusts sang wrong, it lowered, allowed focus. Wind corridors reported strength. The hub bled harbor, smoothing when inland moisture fell behind. Vaults sent night cold status. If dew climbed, the hub throttled intake to starve blooms. Resonance chambers under the tide reported phase. The hub staggered valves to keep hum from becoming pulse. It throttled learning. 2 plaza cycles drifted by design when rumor volume spiked, forcing local desynchrony. Evidence for linkage sits in alloys and rights. Valve collars here share trace signatures with the delta. Brackets match mountain pitch. Soot isotopes align with the glacier chamber's trays. Inscriptions repeat balance motifs alongside maintenance rights. 3 hands, 3 windows, 3 denials before gain increases. Manuals, no, but margins on stones tell stewards when to say not yet. Complication is absence. One purge erased the maintainers, the people who enforced denial. Titles vanish between layers. A festival replaces a calibration. The break that halted forced flood windows never returned. The plaza drift routine stops. The harbor override is carved out. A missing failsafe turned coordination into coupling. Crisis followed as subsystems amplified each other. The river forced windows, mirrors ran hot, harbor corridors flattened inland gradients, vaults breathed too much, domes pulsed, plazas synchronized fear, glacier dials overshot. The hub, starved of keepers and thresholds, could only propagate noise. Leaders read danger and killed the system, sealing the hall, scrubbing rights, burning names. They didn't bury a weapon. They buried a culture of restraint, distributed care stitched across water, light, wind, pressure, cold, and attention. That's the doctrine missing under the tarps. What they buried, what we choose. The past wasn't lost. It was pushed under because restraint scared rulers as much as power did. If you want more of what's sealed under sand and silt, subscribe and watch the companion on modern geoengineering risks next. Bring questions, demand sources, and share only what survives scrutiny. Your curiosity, tested in daylight, is the failsafe they couldn't erase. If this mapping of the pattern hit you, send it to one person who needs to see it. The open loop stays open. Somewhere that missing failsafe may already be rebuilt, and whether it protects or bites depends on what we do now.